Les damos la bienvenida a esta nueva actividad en línea del Instituto Cervantes de Utrecht que se enmarca en el programa Los océanos 500 años después. Un programa diseñado de la mano del CSIC, del Centro Superior de Investigaciones Científicas, con el patrocinio de Iberdrola. Se trata, como nuestros invitados explicarán, de reflexionar sobre la evolución de los océanos, tomando como punto de partida el descubrimiento de los mares para comparar ese momento con su condición actual y analizar la destrucción que han sufrido. En este proceso se puede poner de manifiesto la labor de la ciencia y el valor del conocimiento de la historia como arma para la conservación de nuestro planeta. Se hablará quizá de las amenazas que se ciernen sobre la biodiversidad marina, los efectos adversos en el cambio climático y en la salud, la gestión inteligente de los residuos. En fin, quizá también esperamos se sugerirán acciones que se deben aplicar con urgencia, como la creación de una adecuada red internacional de reservas marinas. En fin, temas apasionantes que deberían ayudar a preservar los océanos para las generaciones futuras. Nuestros ponentes de hoy son, en primer lugar, Iris Hendricks, licenciada en Biología Marina y doctora en Matemáticas y Ciencias Naturales por la Universidad de Groningen. Actualmente forma parte del Mediterranean Institute for Advanced Studies. También va a participar Jack Middelberg, que es el jefe del Departamento de Geociencias y Ciencias de la Tierra de la Universidad de Utrecht. En 2020 ha sido reconocido como miembro del European Academy of Sciences. Va a moderar el coloquio Laura Villanueva, que es microbióloga marina y biogeoquímica en el Real Instituto Holandés de Investigaciones Marinas. Laura forma parte de la Asociación de Científicos Españoles en los Países Bajos, con la que el instituto colabora con frecuencia. Ojalá encontremos el tono del coloquio para llegar no solo a la comunidad científica y a los expertos, sino también a un público general interesado en estos temas, pero a un nivel divulgativo. Muchísimas gracias a los ponentes y también muchísimas gracias de nuevo a Iberdrola y al CSIC en esta feliz colaboración. El esfuerzo conjunto se verá reflejado en actividades no solo como esta en los Países Bajos, sino también en otros centros del Instituto Cervantes en el mundo. Y también se pondrá de manifiesto en un acto en Madrid que se celebrará más adelante. Muchísimas gracias.
Welcome everybody, and I would like to give now the floor to Dr. Iris Hendricks, who's gonna give the presentation now.
So thank you for the invitation. I would have really liked to be in the Netherlands right now to give this presentation, because I was looking forward to representing my adoptive country in my country of origin. But luckily, at least the technology advanced a lot and we are able to do this virtually. So I can talk to you online now. So to keep in the theme of connectivity and travel, which in this case wasn't possible, I would like to start by talking a little bit about the oceans a little over 500 years ago in the 15th century. In the 15th century, the oceans were like a vast area that was relatively unknown, and it was also unknown what was behind all that all those water masses. So we've all learned about the voyage of Christopher Columbus, who sailed to America and started what we now know as the Columbian Exchange. So this is an era in the 15th and the 16th century with heightened exchange between the Americas and Western Africa and Europe. So during this Columbian interchange, there was exchange of culture, of people, sometimes voluntary, sometimes involuntary, and also of, for instance, food products. In the 16th century, the potato was introduced to Europe, and this has really changed the agricultural landscape. So during this era in the 15th, 16th century, not only items got transported like in a deliberate way, there were also undelivered passengers, for instance, invasive species. And an example is the soft shell clam, which was actually extinct in the Atlantic Europe in the Pleistocene and got reintroduced in Europe. in between 400 and 700 years ago. So this is a direct effect of the increased traffic and the increased transport between Europe and the Americas. So what is an introduced species? An introduced species, the definition, is actually a species that is not native to a region, and it has arrived with human interference. So it has to be introduced by humans. For instance, if it travels by its own means, it's not an introduced species, it's still native, but it expanded its range, or it has traveled by dispersion. For instance, bivalves have a pelagic larval stage in which the larvae of the bivalves actually swim in the water column and get dispersed by currents. So they travel through the water column by currents some distance, but these distances are really limited also because the period of the larvae in the water column is limited, around 2 weeks mostly. So movements of populations is limited in distance, while an introduced species is transported over larger distances by human interference. So in the case of Columbus, this transport has happened by wooden ships, and the transport mechanism by which a species is transferred to another location is called a vector. So in the case of Columbus, the wooden ship was a vector, and the introduction was unintentional because the movement probably was an unintended byproduct of the movement of the ships. So they weren't actually planning on moving bivalve species from one side of the Atlantic to the other. It was a byproduct. And this in contrast to deliberate introductions, which I will talk a little bit more later, where the movement of the species was actually intentional. So in the case of Columbus, the transport was by wooden ships, and one of the most known examples of a species that got transferred by ship movement is the shipworm, which is actually not a worm but a bivalve, which is a wood-boring bivalve that was a big problem for the wooden ships. And this is actually the growth on the hull of a ship is called fouling, and with the development of other types of hulls, like we can see in the picture underneath, this problem with the shipworm got less important, but still there was a lot of growth on the hulls, which doesn't only cause introduction of species from one side to another, it also increases the friction of the ship in the water column, which makes it slower and therefore is not wanted by ship owners. So to prevent this, it's possible to use anti-fouling paints, which prevent organisms to actually grow on the hull. And by the mid-1700s, shipbuilders already thought of a way of preventing, for instance, shipworm to affect the ships by putting copper plates, hammering copper plates on the hulls of the ship. And more modern anti-fouling paints, for instance, can use copper elements, or they can use chemical compounds that prevent the growth of organisms on the hull of a ship. This can have also negative effects on the marine environment when they're toxic. So not only growth on a hard surface can cause species to move from one side to another, also transport by ballast water is a factor of introduction of invasive species. So ballast water is the water that, for instance, a merchant ship takes on board to be more stable when it doesn't have a very heavy load. So it's still stable in the water column. They will take this water on board in one location in the harbor where they start and bring it to the harbor where they actually load the merchandise and get rid of the water. So this is also a vector, as in this water, larvae and spores of several marine organisms can travel. So examples of invasive organisms that you probably have heard all about are the zebra mussel, which is a bivalve, and the comb jelly, which is a huge problem in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. So for a long period now, there's been an increase in maritime traffic because there's an increase in global trade. So there are more ships, more movements. So the connectivity between maritime regions has also increased. So this map on the left-hand side, you can see the shipping routes, and we can see that there's very heavy traffic between Europe, the Americas, and Asia. And maybe it's not so visible in our daily life that a lot of the goods that we use are actually transported by ship. But at the moment that a ship, for instance, gets caught in an important transport canal, like not very long ago, the Ever Given in the Suez Canal, it becomes apparent that a lot of the goods that we use are actually transported by ship, and that there's a huge traffic of ships, and thus introduction vectors for possible introduction vectors for invasive species. So the Suez Canal is a connection between the tropical Red Sea and the temperate Mediterranean, which is a kind of a shortcut between Asia and Europe, which causes the ships to be much faster in the transport, because if not, they would have to round Cape Hope, which will use more fuel and cause a longer transport time. So the Suez Canal is traveled a lot to shorten the distance. So the Suez Canal exists for a very long time, has been recently widened, which also increases the transport from one side to another. But there are also some areas where there wasn't a lot of transport until recently. For instance, when the Arctic becomes ice-free, this would open up a possibility to transport goods from one side to another. And you don't see it so much on this kind of maps, which is a Mercator projection, because it inflates the northern and the southern regions. But the Arctic is a very efficient way to transport goods from one side to another if it would be ice-free. So this would actually increase connectivity between regions in the future. So these were kind of unintentional introductions, as the movement of a species from one side to another is the byproduct of transport and not intended. There are also deliberate introductions, for instance, in aquaculture, which is used to meet the demand, the ever-increasing demand of food production. In the Netherlands, the Japanese oyster was introduced as a species that could be cultivated, and it was thought that it would be not so much of a problem because the water surely would be too cold for reproduction of the species. So even when I was working in Holland, which is over more than a decade ago, it was already clear that the Japanese oyster was able to reproduce in the estuarine areas. And it actually forms large reefs, which are a problem for divers, as they're very sharp and make it very difficult to transit. So apart from introductions because of aquaculture, the oyster was transported intentionally as a food product. But with oysters, the transport of oysters, also unintentional introductions could have taken place. For instance, seaweeds growing on the shells of the oysters, which are not so deliberate, but also introductions. Then another vector is the ornamental species trade. So a lot of aquarium species get transferred from one side to another to be sold as ornamental species. And for instance, a tropical algae, Caulerpa toxifolia, allegedly escaped from the Monaca aquarium and is now abundant on the French side of the Mediterranean coast. So due to this unintended and intended introduction of species from the native site to the new sites, we've seen a really steep increase of non-native species through the years. So due to the increased marine traffic and higher food demands, we've seen the number of non-native species grow a lot over the years. And if we look at the relative importance of the vectors, so the transport mechanisms, you can see that, for instance, in the Mediterranean, which is here on the right-hand side, the Suez Canal is one of the most important factors in the introduction of new species, followed by marine traffic and aquaculture. But also, if we look at, for instance, the introduction of seaweeds worldwide, we can see that even though we know a lot of the vectors that have brought them to the new areas, which are what I already mentioned, the Suez Canal, ballast water, aquaculture, shellfish farming, and hull fouling, we also see that there are a lot of vectors that we actually don't know about. So we don't know how an algal species got introduced from one side to the other. If we turn back to the Mediterranean and the Suez Canal, this is a map of the relative importance of introduced species over native species. So the red color are areas where there are more invasive species present, and the blue areas are mostly native species. So we can see that close to the opening of the Suez Canal, there's the highest concentration of introduced species. So the Suez Canal, mainly the transport is from the tropical Red Sea to the temperate Mediterranean. But it's not only the proximity to the vector. If we look at the temperature, this is the annual mean sea surface temperature in the Mediterranean, we also see that the Mediterranean Sea in the southeast is much warmer than in the northwest. So not only the proximity of the Suez Canal is important, the temperature is probably much closer to the native range of the introduced species. So this means that a species is not always, an introduced species doesn't always have to be successful in the area where it's introduced. In order to be established, it needs to encounter the right environmental conditions that are within the ranges it can grow in. And for instance, for a tropical species, it's much more logical to be able to grow well in an area that has a closer temperature range than as its native site. So what we're seeing is actually the temperature, the sea surface temperature over the years is increasing. So we can see that the Mediterranean will be more and more suitable for species that like warmer temperatures. But also this warming in the Mediterranean is not homogeneous. The southeastern part of the Mediterranean is warming much faster than the northwestern area. And we can see this on the right-hand graph, which is the trend of the warming in the Mediterranean basin. And we see in red that the sea surface is warming up much faster, for instance, near Crete, than in the northwestern part of the Mediterranean. So this also means that an area would be more suitable for a species that like warmer water, but also the species that live in a certain site and are faced with this changing temperatures. They might want to move northwards in order to follow the optimal temperature, the optimal environmental conditions. So this depends on the species and the preference for a temperature range, but a lot of the species have a limited temperature range, and if the Mediterranean Sea is warming, they would be forced to actually change their range, which is called a range shift. So to go back to the definitions, even if we see a range expansion because of higher temperatures, this species would still be considered native because it's not moving because of the intervention of humans. Although this could be discussed as the warming, global warming is actually caused by human action. So this is discussable. So I've talked a lot about ranges where species live. A range is the geographical area in which the species can be found. And the match of a species to a specific environmental condition, so the environmental parameters that the species is limited to, is called a niche in ecology. And these environmental conditions that the species needs to be successfully established can be, for instance, humidity, oxygen availability, salinity, light, water density, pH, but also temperature. And this is what I've been talking about. So the environmental conditions that are very important for the range of where a species can live and its niche, one of the most important factors is temperature. And here we see the example of two to barnacle species, and we can see that it's not always that easy. It's not always abiotic factors. So these two species have a fundamental niche that is determined by the humidity, like the spray zone. They need a certain spray in order to live in an area. So what we can see is that their fundamental niche overlaps. So one species is not able to grow very high where it's very dry, and the other species is, but the other species would be able to grow much lower as well. So it's not only the abiotic conditions, so the environmental parameters, it's also the interaction between species. So the realized niche, the place where they actually live, is also a function of the interaction between these species. So this is also true for a species that is in a range expansion or is introduced in the site. It's not only the abiotic conditions that condition if a species can live there, it's also interaction with the species that are already present there. So, and why is temperature so important? So temperature is not a stable environmental parameter in these last years, as we are living in a world where we expect to see a 1.5 degree increase in temperature at the end of the century. So these are the predictions by the International Panel of Climate Change of overall global warming. And this is caused by the burning of fossil fuels. So the temperature is actually changing. And what can a species do to accommodate if the temperature in the place where they live is actually not within the optimal environmental range that they can live in? So for terrestrial species, if they live in a mountainous area, they can move up as the temperature is lower, higher up. But this also is a challenge because not only the temperature changes, but if they go up into the mountains, the oxygen availability will drop and the ultraviolet radiation will increase. So the question is, will the species be able to adapt to these other not so ideal circumstances? For marine species, if they follow a certain temperature range, they can move poleward. So for a northern hemisphere species, they would be to the North Pole, but for a species living on the southern hemisphere, like for instance Australia, this would be moving towards the South Pole. And for marine species, they can move deeper because deeper in the ocean, the temperature is lower. So this is also a way to escape a non-optimal environment by moving deeper. And for instance, in the Mediterranean, where there's a boundary to the northern side of the Mediterranean, so the species that are living in the northwest of the Mediterranean, they can't move up further north because there's a physical boundary, there's a landmass present, so they can't move more towards the pole. So the only thing they could actually do to accommodate their the temperature range is move down. So this is an example of a species that has a current geographical range in Europe and in the Americas that has the potential to move up north. So, and in this case, moving northward means that the light availability will increase in summer because at higher latitudes there's more light in summer, but decrease in winter. So this would be an advantage in summer, but a disadvantage in winter. So kind of to sum up my my presentation, I think this quote is matches pretty well, and it's a quote that's been wrongly attributed to Darwin, but it wasn't Darwin, although it does fit to the ideas Darwin had. And the quote is, "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent, it's the one that's most adaptable to change." So living in a changing world means that we need to show a lot of adaptability in order to survive and to stay. And I'm just hoping that that we as humans can show a lot of adaptability and adapt to the changing environment by actually changing to renewable energies to hold the changes we are causing in the planet at the moment by burning fossil fuels. So that's my hope for the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Iris, for this really nice overview and presentation. And I would like to give the floor to Professor Jack Middleworth.
Thank you, Laura, for the introduction, and Thank you, Cervantes Institute, for inviting me to give this presentation. I know the building only from the outside. When I walk from my home, I'm living downtown, to go to the flower market. I always see the building, but I've never been inside. So I'm going to take up the climate issue which Iris hinted at. I'm going to talk about carbon in the ocean, and I will try to convey to you in a simple way what is the chemistry behind it and what is the impact of carbon dioxide enrichment on the ocean. Before that, I'm going back to the 19th century. At the end of the 19th century, there was Svante Arrhenius. He's a chemist, and he already published, say about 125 years ago, that if you have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that you will increase the temperature. So we already know as humans that more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere means warming. Then in the International Geophysical Year in 1956, there were visionary scientists, including Roger Revelle, which you can see on the picture on the right. He said, if we keep on producing fossil fuel derived CO2 and we keep on producing new buildings with concrete, we are going to increase the atmospheric CO2. It is still small, but because of the economic growth after the Second World War, we will probably go and see an increase. Now, this statement inspired a young scientist, Charles Keeling, to start making the measurements of carbon dioxide. On the left-hand side, you see carbon dioxide concentration versus time. He started to do the measurement in 57, and already in 59 he could see that there was a systematic increase in carbon dioxide going up with time. Now, so the idea, the inspiration of Revelle was validated, and then this inspired many scientists all over the world to measure the carbon dioxide continuously. And now we have it very well documented that there is a steady increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this is, we are now at a level of about 415 ppm. So 415 molecules out of 1 million molecules are carbon dioxide. That's not a lot, but still enough for get global warming. So before I can talk about the global carbon cycle, I have to introduce the currency. The currency is 1 petagram, or the same as 1 gigaton. That's about all fishes in the ocean. That's about a quarter of all the food we as humans consume, and that's about 10% of all our carbon emission. So to give you an example, what is 1 petagram? 1 petagram are 400,000 Olympic swimming pools, which each measure about 50 meters by 25 meters by 2 meters. So that's 1 petagram is really a lot. So what are the two main causes of CO2 release by humans? One is deforestation, that's about 1.6 petagram carbon per year. And the other major source, the dominant source, is of course the combustion of coal, gas, petrol. Now, this together is about 11 petagram carbon. And what is happening with it? About 47% stays in the atmosphere. We call this the airborne fraction. About 30% is going to terrestrial vegetation. Because there is more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there's also a little bit more nitrogen. We see that the trees, the grass, and the agricultural products are growing faster, which then takes up a little bit of the CO2 which we have added to the atmosphere. And about a quarter is going to the ocean. And that's what my presentation is about. So we have seen that this 47% of human carbon remains in the atmosphere is the cause of global warming climate change. Oceans store about 30% of all the human-derived carbon at this moment. And of course, there is no free lunch. This carbon dioxide storage service of the ocean comes at a price. The ocean is acidifying. And we call this the other CO2 problem, or the second CO2 problem. And the ocean contains a lot of carbon dioxide, about 44 times more than there is in the atmosphere. Now, why is this? And then I will show 2 sheets with a little bit of chemistry for those of you who had high school chemistry. So the main reason why there is so much carbon in the ocean is that the ocean, of course, is very large. It's 70% of the Earth's surface, about 3.5 kilometers deep. And if you have only a very tiny amount of additional carbon in the ocean, it is already enough to take up a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But the reason why the ocean can take up so much carbon dioxide is that the carbon dioxide, which is coming into the ocean, basically reacts with the water, and then it forms a weak acid, carbonic acid, as we all know from our sodas, etc. And then this carbonic acid, which is coming from the carbon dioxide, is being transformed, and that's where the chemistry comes in. We don't have to discuss that, but basically carbon dioxide is a gas which can exchange between the water and the air. It is transformed into ions, for the technical skilled people, bicarbonate and carbonate ions. And this transformation is really important because 19 out of the 20 carbon dioxide molecules entering the ocean are transformed in those ions and then are trapped in the ocean. And when you do the transformation, you also release protons. That means you produce acid. Now, what is then ocean acidification? Ocean acidification is the increase in the amount of protons because CO2 goes into the ocean. And this is really a worldwide problem. And this is a very well-known problem as well, because we have theory, thermodynamics, which we know it always works. That's what thermodynamics is, an experience-based discipline. And if you do predictions of thermodynamics and you make observations, you see that they perfectly agree. Where do we make those observations? We have it in the Hawaii Ocean Time Series Station. We have Bermuda Atlantic Time Station. We have Estox, that's a Spanish-operated time series station. And then we have a lonely scientist from Iceland making this time series of pH. Now, for the non-scientists among you, this scientist was working on his own. He didn't get a lot of attention the first 20 years of his career, but then suddenly people started to realize that his measurements makes a lot of sense. And then his research was picked up and he was much better appreciated. So what? Huh? So why should we worry about ocean acidification? Now, a lot of the organisms in the sea produce a calcium carbonate skeleton. We have tropical corals, cold water corals, and of course, the berbericious, the cockles. And all those calcite-producing organisms, they show a decline if the ocean is acidified. You can see that in the red. There are also, of course, winners. In general, you can say that some of the primary producers, so the plants and the algae, they show a positive effect because they use carbon dioxide, and if there is more carbon dioxide, they grow faster. Then there are also a lot of unexpected, unanticipated surprises. One of the things is that if you lower the pH, you can see that here, if you're going lower in the pH, and if you have low frequency, you see that there is less attenuation. That means that the ocean is getting more noisy. That means that all the large fishes and mammals communicating with sound are experiencing a more noisy ocean as a consequence of ocean acidification. And there are thousands of those side effects of ocean acidification. So another thing is this something which organisms can adapt to? Partly yes, partly not so good, because we have studied natural CO2 seeps. That's where volcanic CO2 from natural conditions are seeping out of the seafloor in the Mediterranean and here in Papua New Guinea, so the tropical system. On the left, you see a normal, say Mediterranean sea grass meadow, and here you have one with a lower pH. you see that there are large differences. This, in particular, you see it here for the tropical system, where you see the normal pH, you have a nice coral reef, and then you're going down, and you see that at the pH which we are going to get in about 10 years, it looks like this. And what we are getting at the end of the century, if we are not following the Paris, we get a situation like this. So it has a lot of consequences. Then, can we do something about it? Of course, the main thing what we can do is stop using fossil fuels. And if we are not going to stop this, we are going to have problems with ocean acidification. We can partly remediate it by adding olefin, which is a mineral which you find everywhere, or lime, which you can either add on land or you can add it in the sea, and this will counteract ocean acidification. And this is then coming to my last sheet. That's about, can we use the oceans to solve the climate problem? This is a very complex graph. This is, it's showing at the bottom is showing the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So what we need to prosper as human societies on this globe. We want, for instance, the first one is no poverty, second one is zero hunger. And on the top, you see some ocean-based solutions and other solutions for the climate problem. And you, two of them I want to highlight. This is the coastal blue carbon. That's about stimulating maintenance and seagrasses and mangrove. You see that it has a small contributions, but there are no negative side effects. It's good for everything. The other potential ocean solution is adding ocean alkalinity, as I just showed. It has a large potential. In fact, it has the largest potential of all climate solutions proposed so far, but we know very little about whether we can do it, what are the negative side effects to it. So with this, I would like to give the floor back to our chair, Laura.
A lot, Jack, for this presentation. And I would like to open this dialogue between the three of us about how do we see the oceans 500 years later. And to kind of steer this conversation now, I would like to just maybe put the question out there for both of you. How would you envision, if you could take a peek now into the future, 500 years more now from now, what would you expect to see? How would you expect to see our oceans now in the framework of what we have mentioned now about the effects of climate change and also potential development of different species in the oceans?
Iris, are you starting?
Depends on the scenario, really. Are we going to be able to stop burning fossil fuels or not? If we are able to curb the fossil fuel burning, then we will see that the change will be very slow, because the CO2 is accumulated in the atmosphere. It won't be direct. Even if we stop burning, we will still see increased temperatures, but it will be better in 500 years. It's a long time. So it really depends if we can stop using fossil fuels and change to renewable energy or not. If we can't, I don't even want to imagine what the ocean looks in 500 years.
Yeah, this is exactly what I was gonna make the point is like, what would you see in 500 years if we don't do anything about it?
So shall I take, so if we wouldn't do anything about it, we would probably have an ocean which is a couple of degrees warmer, in particular at a higher latitude. So the polar region will warm much more than the tropical regions. We will have a sea level which is much higher, so which means that depending on how fast the melting on the North and South Pole ice sheets are going, it will be 5 to or more meters, which means that we have a problem in this country, and the people in Utrecht may perhaps be living on the beach then. The CO2 which we have emitted, even if we stop now, about 8 to 10% will be there the coming 1,000 years, whatever we do, unless we are going to actively remove it out of the atmosphere. So some of the effects will be there. Global warming will be there. We can moderate it, but it has a lot of consequences which we do not know well. For instance, even a simple question, will the ocean be more productive or less productive overall, is not easily answered. Because at some places, warming might be leading to more production, and some other places might lead to less production, which then has consequences for all the organisms living on primary producers, all the way up to the fish we eat and the mussels and the oysters, etc. So it has a lot of consequences, and in particular, for the Netherlands, the most severe thing is sea level rise. If we are not going to do anything.
And I also think you can't see this phenomenon in an isolated way. We are a lot of people. A lot of people eat a lot of seafood, so it's not only warming, acidification. It's also overfishing. It's a lot of pressure.
And what would be like the first actions that they need to be taken if we want to stop the process? I mean, I'm sure that some things are already in the works, but like, what do you think would be the most immediate action that needs to be taken by policymakers, like advice to specific organizations?
Yeah, of course, the first thing is to really limit the release of carbon dioxide. Then try to stimulate as well how we can use the ocean to solve part of the climate problem. For the climate part, we should stimulate the marine protected areas where fishermen are not allowed to come, so that we have some refuges for biodiversity and for ecosystems which are really precious. What else we should do? There's so many things we should do. Some things will solve themselves. I think if we are not going to better fisheries management, I don't think we are going to eat a lot of fish anymore after 2100. So that's
yes. I'd like to add. Well, actually, Jack already said it. Stop habitat destruction, marine habitat destruction. We're using the coastal zone. And for instance, the transformance of mangrove area into shrimp farming, that's not a good idea, because also mangroves and other vegetated areas are actually mitigating climate change, and we should really stop this kind of destruction.
And what about, for example, is there any initiatives that we know of at the moment in which there's creation of more protective areas? For example, like increase of mangroves, as you were saying, like is there any communication to the governments that these areas need to be expanded for the sake of also mitigating climate change? Do you know if there's anything like that?
You know, Jack, I know there's a lot of initiatives, but I'm not really sure about how official they are, because, for instance, for you can buy carbon credits, but they're mostly based in terrestrial projects. I'm not aware how official, for instance, ocean-based carbon credits are.
Neither I'm also not aware how well they are credited yet, but there is potential. And another thing what is happening, we are going more and more to the sea, and we get that. You would say that the ocean covers 70% of the Earth. There is a limitation of space, and for instance, the continental shelf, like the North Sea, there is a lot of demand. There used to be that the Navy had a lot of space, and then there was the cars industry and the fishermen. But now we of course have all the windmills, and in some countries also the solar panels, and all those activities have space, and there are conflicts then, and sometimes there's also synergy, because if you are constructing windmills at sea, you are more or less protecting a marine protected area, because the fishermen are not allowed to sail near to it because there are cables. And if those cables are being perturbed, then they have a very big fine, so they cannot get insurance for it. So there are lots of positive things about looking at synergy between the different activities which are there. And that's an active area of research which is really across the disciplines.
What about migrating birds?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, there's always a downside. Yes, indeed.
You were mentioning something that it was very interesting to also highlight a little bit more. It is the fact that of course with global warming we are going to have more the icing of the Arctic, and of course like a lot of more transport through the Arctic that is going to have like a really big impact also in invasive species, but also like transport of species. How can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think this is really something that it's like really striking for someone that really does not really have the grasp of what this is going to happen. Now we're going to have an entry of new species through there, which is a direct consequence of global warming.
I think the Arctic has been one of the regions that has been least accessible because of the ice cover. And with this ice cover gone, of course, it's much more accessible. And you can also see countries clamoring to exploit the area, for instance, for oil and other resources. I think we humans tend to be greedy and try to get our hands on whatever is available. And of course, the Arctic offers a lot of opportunities, not only as a transport way, but also as an area where there's resources that have not been mined yet that are available. And I think it's important to be one step ahead and try to protect that area. Yeah. You want to add something, Jack?
No. That is nothing to add about the Antarctic region. That of course the Arctic is a real special case because it will likely be ice-free, which means that the whole ecosystem will change, and we will see what's going to happen. How we are, whether we leave all the materials there, and then there is of course also when we get an energy transition, we also need new resources, and deep sea mining is one of the ways to get some of the precious metals which we need, the cobalt, the niobium, the rare earth elements which are in the sea. They of course they are on land, but they are in countries which are not always politically stable, and then companies rather go to sea, which in the open sea nobody owns it yet, so they are interested, and that's also an issue which is coming up now as an issue for the coming decades in the ocean.
Yeah, indeed, this is going to be one of the topics to take into account, of course, because also the companies that are involved in the exploitation of these minerals in the deep sea, they don't really particularly have in mind what is the ecological effect of the deep sea mining. And although some companies, they might be asking scientists for their input, I think this is going to be also something that is going to affect, of course, all the many levels of the ocean. Can you maybe, do you want to add something to that, Iris? I don't know what is known at the moment of how these kind of activities have been affecting the local marine fauna.
I'm not working so much with Arctic fauna. I would like to work more in the Arctic. We had an Arctic project, but basically what I'm working on is on the poleward expansion of vegetation, which can profit from the ice-free Arctic, because there's a longer growing period in summer, and we can see that they can actually influence their environment a lot in coastal areas. But I'm not aware of any. I'm not very knowledgeable about deep sea mining, for instance.
And in general, for example, have you ever been approached by, for example, from governmental officers or policymakers or even companies, private companies, about making a study about the effects of like human activities on marine organisms? Is this something that it's something that the public should know, that at least the scientists are being like approached to give their opinion about this?
Well, working in Spain, not so much in Arctic projects. We do get approached
not in the Arctic only,
from the government in the Mediterranean, and then it's usually about eutrophication, the adding of nutrients to the waters, contamination, and the effect on the environment. And as I said, I tend to focus a lot on the Mediterranean because I have it so close at hand, and it's an area where there's a really high anthropogenic pressure. So it's an area where all the coastal space is really used because of tourism, urbanization. There's a lot of eutrophication, a lot of pressures in the Mediterranean, and a lot of habitat destruction as well. But we get approached more by governmental institutes than private companies. Actually, I think we scientists, at least in Spain, have a bit of a problem in our relation with the private companies because we don't interact so much. Maybe because we're not so focused on really applied issues as in the Netherlands. What do you think, Jack?
Yeah, those. But in the Netherlands, of course, you have university scientists, and you have a lot of applied large institutions, and those large institutions, they usually have a better connection with the users and the people working at sea. For the companies are less, of course, the commercial interest is at sea is either shipping, energy and cars, and fisheries, and nowadays then also the deep sea mining. And the companies, we don't have mining companies in the Netherlands, but we do have service providers at sea. So, and those companies have contacted me and also my colleagues in Utrecht, whether we knew anything about minerals at the seafloor and whether we could provide students to them. But our interest is, we are willing to help them, but our interest is environmental impact studies. We want to assure that if they're going to do that, if there is a need for those metals in order to have enough windmills, because you need a lot of neodymium, for instance, for windmills, that the environmental impact will be as limited as possible. And that's where the students are interested in. They are not interested in making money and disturbing the sea floor for mining minerals.
Yeah, I find also very I feel a bit confronted also with the idea of companies that have been approaching us in a way that I feel that they only would like to have an approval stamp by scientists saying it's okay to do so, while we might not feel that way. Some sort of like report saying it is okay, nothing's changing, you can go ahead and mine as many minerals as you want from the ocean. And this is something that, as like you were saying, I think it is very important also to improve in a way the connection between scientists and companies, between scientists and the government. And this is not something that can come only from the scientific point of view. It should be something like government-wise, they should be more aware of the information that we can provide to all the levels of society. And I think that's something very important. Of course, it comes from the way also that we make the effort to communicate better our research so that it can be more appealing to all publics of all levels of society. And that is how this kind of communication is going to get more fluid, I think. In that sense, because of course we have been here overviewing today many things that are really negative effects on the oceans of the last 500 years of the anthropogenic, the human impact on the ocean. But is there any positive note that we can highlight, or any hope for the future that things will get better, or that we will learn about this interaction between the oceans and humans? What do you think? No positive notes.
No, there are many positive things. I think that we have realized that we anything we're going to do in the ocean, we should limit as much as possible the environmental impact. We should look for synergy. For instance, the example Iris gave about the mangroves. That say in some countries is still the Wild West. You just clear a mangrove forest, you make a swim pond, and then you move away. But you can also make a swim pond and try to clean the water and reduce the impact as much as possible. Because in the end of the day, people, we can say we should not do it, but we also have to feed the population, and we don't all want just food which is tasteless. And we have learned a lot, and we also have seen that we have solved some big environmental problems like the ozone. So I think a lot of the things which we are now facing will be solved in the long term. But there's always a long tail, but ecosystems are quite robust. So I'm very optimistic that some things will go well. Thing which we didn't discuss is the coral reefs, of course, and the marine heat waves and the global warming and tropical colds. That's one of the things which is really worrying. But some other things, the system will evolve if we take care to prevent as much as possible the damage.
I also think that there's an increased awareness amongst everybody, scientists, but also the public, about the impacts we are having and the fact that there are more marine protected areas and we are looking for solutions is a very positive thing.
Yeah. And another positive example is, of course, eutrophication was much more, at least in Europe, it was worse 10, 15, 20 years ago than it is now at many places. And we are now in the science, we talk about oligoeutrophication or de-eutrophication. Mm-hmm. But in some other places in the world, in Asia, you still see that the nutrients are going up and they are going to suffer the same thing we have had. But of course, they can learn from us, so they will not get it as bad as we had, hopefully. So we as humans, we adapt, we learn, and we can then hopefully limit as much as possible the impact of our actions.
And learn from our mistakes, of course. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think this was really wonderful. I would like to thank you again for your time and for this really nice conversation and presentation. And I would like to also take the chance to thank the Instituto Cervantes for this really great initiative and the sponsors. And with this, I would like to say thanks again. And yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.